and share my screen. Yes. Okay. So, right now we've gotten to where we need to start making some assets and adding some stuff to some more features to our game. And the one I wanted to start with this week was a health pickup. And we don't really have a model in our game right now that's really suitable as a health pickup, so we're going to make one. We're going to make a very, very simple object today to get started on using Blender. So if you see on the screen here, I've got Unity open, and I've got Visual Studio, and I have Blender, and I have Gimp. This is normally what I have open when I'm actually working on my own stuff, and usually the order I have it in. I'm working in Unity, so I write a script which opens Visual Studio. Then I realize I need an object, so I go to Blender to make it. Then I realize I need to paint it, so I go to Gimp to paint it. You can paint stuff inside Blender, but as you'll see, it's not as good as having a dedicated image manipulation program. So let's open Blender, and you should see this splash screen. If you don't see Blender 2.79 and you got some other version of it, your splash screen will look different, and the controls may be a little bit different. In the newer versions of Blender, they've reversed the order of the mouse buttons. They've introduced a lot of things, but they've also changed the interface significantly and changed which mouse button does what. So I find it awkward to use because I've been using this version for a while. Not this version, but this interface and these tools. So I have not upgraded to the new 2.8 because I'm used to this interface. So I'm going to teach you this interface because it's what I know. Okay, so when you open it up, so what we're going to do is we're going to make a health cube with just a simple cross on it, and then we're going to import it into our game and animate it and make the player pick it up and cause his health to be healed. So I'm going to just left click anywhere outside of the about screen, and it'll take me to my scene. So this is the default scene. And it's got three things in it. It's got a camera here, this thing. And you right click to select objects in GIMP, not left click. There's a light source here, and there's a cube. We don't need any of those things. We're going to need a cube, but we're going to add one manually rather than using this one, just so I can show you how to add an object manually. So I'm going to quickly press AA, and that will select all the objects in the scene, and then I'm going to press delete. And it will say, are you sure you want to delete these? And I'm going to click yes, delete. So now I should have an empty scene. So I know that I'm going to build, what we're building is going to be basically a box. So I'm going to click add mesh cube. And notice that it added it where my cursor was. Because I had clicked in the scene and moved the cursor around, so it added it where my cursor was. So I'm going to come up here to this expandable window that says transform, and it has my location in X, Y, and Z values. I'm going to just change these all to 0. And that will put my box back at the origin. By default, when you import a box, you have the radius of it, which is 1, and it uses the same units as Unity. It's 1 is 1 meter typically. So we've got a box, and we're looking at it. To move around like I'm doing, hold down the mouse wheel. I'm sorry, I'm so used to doing this, I'm going to have to remember to tell you what to click to move around and stuff. The mouse wheel in causes you to zoom into an object. Mouse wheel out causes you to zoom out. If you're over somewhere, I use Control Z a lot when I'm in Blender. If you're off somewhere and you can't find an object, you have a scene view up here, and you can double click on it. Double click on it. I can't. It should zoom to the object, but for some reason it's not doing it. Anyway, our object right now is at the center of the screen, so it should be easy to find. Okay. So hold on the middle mouse wheel to move around in 3D space and zoom in and out using the scroll wheel. You're going to want to know how to do this stuff because 3D objects you want to look at from a bunch of different directions. If you hold down the shift and hold down the middle mouse button, you can move laterally in the same. So hold down the middle mouse button, move around, hold down shift and middle mouse button, move around laterally, and zoom in and out. Okay. Now, the Blender hopefully has some snap cameras that has built in that will allow you to go to specific views. These tools are built into the number pad. So if you press 1, it'll flip to a forward-facing view, no matter where you're oriented. Now, in this particular view, my view is has perspective applied to it. If I hit the 5 key on my number pad, it goes to an orthographic view, which does not have perspective. To show you what I mean here, I'm going to press Z to make the object transparent. And then if I press 5, here it's in perspective mode. You can see it gets smaller as it goes away from me. And here it's just a straight square because I'm looking at a cube with no perspective on. Working in the orthographic mode, the mode without perspective, is normally what you want to do. Sometimes you may want to switch to orthographic mode to perspective mode to see how something is coming along, but typically you want to work in orthographic mode. So pressing 1 gives me a front view. If I press 3, it gives me a side view. So I'm looking in the positive direction of the X axis. And if I press 7, I'm looking straight down on the object. So in the negative direction of the Z axis. Also, I think I said the positive direction of the X axis, and it's actually the negative direction of the X axis. Is 3. So 1 is the front, 3 is the side, 7 is the top. And 9 is the bottom. So if for just a cube, they all sort of look the same. But you can also move where you're looking around by using the 8 key to rotate on the X-axis. And you can use the 2 key to rotate on the X-axis in the opposite direction. And 4 and 6 rotate on the Z-axis. One important point about the axes. So I'm pressing 1 to go back to my front view. One important point about the axes. The axes in Blender are different than the axes in Unity. Unity uses Y as the up axis. Blender uses Z as the up axis. You have to keep that in mind. Sometimes when you export a model, it'll be upside down and backwards. And that's because the axes are different. So just something to keep in mind. There's a setting you can set when you export a model that we will look at that should correct it, but still, it can sometimes be messed up. Okay, so I'm pressing Z again so I can see my object. And right now, if you see down here in this bar, I am in object mode. Object mode is great because it allows me to see what the object looks like. But I want to actually edit this mode, so I can come down here and switch to edit mode. Or I can just press the tab key, and tab will switch by default, switches between object and edit. What it really does is go between the current mode you're in and the last mode you were in. And if you haven't picked one, it goes to edit as the last one by default. So, and we'll play around with that. Okay, so now I'm in edit mode, and in edit mode it's a little bit different because I can press Z to make it transparent, and you can see that the box is all lit up, but I can see through it. The reason it's all lit up is right now I have every vertex selected. The reason I have all the vertices selected is because I just came here from object mode. So I'm going to press A again. That will deselect all of my vertices. If I press A again, it will select them all. And I can go back and forth between having them all selected or all deselected by pressing A. Okay, I'm going to press 1 to make sure I'm in the front view. And I want to talk about some other things real quick. So 3D objects are made up of 3 parts. There are vertices, which are these dots here that I'm selecting by right-clicking. There are edges, which is, and I can select them because I'm in vertex mode. I can switch to edge mode, and I can select edges. And I can switch to face mode, which will allow me to select specific faces. And notice that I can select through or the back of an object just by clicking near the dot that represents the face. So learning how to look at your object in 3D is something that you get used to over time. There is so much to Blender. I cannot emphasize this enough. What I'm going to show you today is like 0.1% of what Blender can do. People use it as a full animation studio. You can do 2D animation in it. You can use it for video editing. I don't use half of what Blender can do, but it's a pretty powerful tool. So we're going to look at just the very basic transformations. So press 1 to make sure you're in front mode, and click on the face selector in this bar down here to select face mode. So when you select something, you want to select a face, and you select things by right clicking. So let's select the front face. So I press 1 and I click in the middle. It will pick a face for me, but I can't tell the difference between picking. Click it again. I can't tell the difference between picking the front and the back because I'm in orthographic mode. So I always turn it a little bit so I can see exactly which one I'm getting. And I'm doing that again by holding down the mouse wheel and rotating the scene. So I want to select my front face, and we're going to do the very simplest thing you can do to generate a face here. And we're going to press E to extrude. Don't touch anything else, because if you press E and then start moving stuff around, well, you'll see. I'll press E, and okay, so it does a couple of things. It draws a blue line, and E stands for extrude, and we're extruding from this face, and you'll see what that is in just a second. You'll see it draws a blue line saying, I assume you want to extrude along this axis because you picked a face that happens to exactly match this axis, which is true, we do. So if I start moving my mouse around and I haven't clicked anything, you see that it draws the face out from the face that I had. It creates all the side faces to go along with it, and generates all the geometry to keep them all connected. So that's what extrude means. It says take the face that I have, and I want to extrude another face, another surface for it, and all the connecting surfaces that go along with it. So I don't want to extrude it this much, so I'm going to hit Control Z. So left click to deselect it and hit Control Z so that you haven't extruded anything. And now we're going to press E without touching anything. And we're going to press Z, and then we're going to type on our keypad 0.1. So look at what happened there. Without me, whoop. So I'm going to press E, Z, 0.1. So it extruded a face, but it moved it over to the right 1 unit. What I really want it to do is move it out to the front. So I'm going to hit Control Z to my left click because it's still extruding. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo my extrusivity, whatever it was. I'm going to press E, Y, 0.1. Okay, so that's good, and I'm going in the right direction because what we're trying to do is get the face to come out by 1/10 of a meter. But it's going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to press Control Z one more time, and then I'm going to press E, Y, because I want to do it on the Y axis, and then the minus key, -0.1. Okay, so that should give me a tiny face that is extruded a tiny amount from my box. Now, I'm going to press S with that face selected, and I'm going to scale this box, the face that I've selected, and I'm going to type 0.8 and press enter. Okay, so it's not super fancy and super complicated, but at least it's not just a square box now. It's got a little bit of personality and character to it. And I'm going to do that one more time, but in the opposite direction. So I'm going to extrude backwards 0.1 meters. So I'm going to do E to extrude, Y to tell it which axis, and then 0.1. And then S and press enter, and then S to scale, and 0.8 and press enter. So if I press Z, you can see that we basically made a TV, right? We've got a little bit of a beveled edge. And we're going to do this for all 6 sides. Now, there are much faster ways to do something repetitive like this in Blender. As we're just getting started, I want to go through and do everything as manually as I can and tell you exactly which keys I'm pressing so we're all doing it with the same dimensions. You can do whatever you want in Blender. You can extrude it a whole lot and make it look more like a canister. You can divide it up and do all sorts of neat, interesting things. But right now, I'm going to do that same thing 5 more times. So I'm going to pick another side. I'm going to do, and I see I'm on the x-axis here, would be forward for this face. So I'm going to do extrude x 0.1, enter, S for scale, 0.8, enter, extrude x negative 0.1, enter, S for scale, 0.8, enter. And I'm going to go to my back face here. So it's pointing in the positive Y direction. We'll be going forward for this. So I'm going to do E to extrude, 0.1, enter. S to scale, 0.8, enter. E to extrude on the Y-axis by pressing Y, negative 0.1, enter. And S to scale, 0.8, enter. Okay. And I'm going to do this for this face. E to extrude, negative 0.1. Oops, sorry. Control Z because I messed up. E to extrude, 0.1. Enter. S scale 0.8. Enter. E to extrude, negative 0.1. Enter. S to scale 0.8. Enter. So I've done 4 of the sides. Now I need to do the top and the bottom. And remember that the z-axis is up, so I'm going to do E to extrude, Z, to limit to the z-axis, 0.1. Whoop, I messed that up. Extrude, 0.1. There we go. Scale, 0.8. Enter. Extrude, negative 0.1. Enter. Scale, 0.8. Enter. Okay. And then we're going to do the bottom face. Okay, E to extrude, negative 0.1, because I'm going, mess that up. E to extrude, negative 0.1, because I'm going down. Why is it? It's going the wrong way. E to extrude, 0.1. Scale, 0.8, enter. Extrude, negative 0.1, enter. And scale, 0.8, enter. Okay. I realize that I'm not doing very much, but your box should look something like this. If anybody's having trouble and your box doesn't look like this right now, tell me and we'll see if we can get it sorted out. Okay. So this is our basic box. And what we're going to do is we're going to want to paint this box to indicate to the player that it's a health pickup. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can paint it here in Blender, which we're going to do first, and then we're going to switch over to painting it in GIMP because you have much better control over the paint mode in GIMP. So I'm going to press 1 to go back to my front screen, and I'm going to select this face by right-clicking on it, and I'm going to come to the side here where it says Shading UV. It's one of the tabs on the left-hand side. And you see we've got where the faces should be smooth or flat, edges should be smooth or sharp, the vertices should be smooth or sharp. Don't worry about any of that right now. What you do want to mark is the thing that says Mark Seam. And you see it paints the edges orange of the face I had selected. And you want to do that for all of our inner faces. So I'm going to select all my inner faces, and each time I select one, I'm going to click Mark Seam. Okay. Cool. So what that does is it says when I want to paint this object, remember that we can't paint in 3D. Well, you can with special software, but in this instance, we're gonna have to paint this thing in 2 dimensions, even though it exists in 3 dimensions. So we have to rip it apart and create what's called a UV map. A UV map is just a normal XY plane. So why is it called a UV map and not an XY map? Well, XY already have defined roles in this application and in every 3D application. So when people started talking about these maps, they use the letters U and V to describe the maps instead of X and Y, because X and Y already have meaning in this context. Some people have referred to it as the ultraviolet map or something that has nothing to do with that. It's just a coordinate system of U and V. So we need to unwrap this object and take it from 3 dimensions down to 2 dimensions. So we're going to do that right now. So up in the top window, you can see that we're in a default window. I'm going to click this, and one of my choices is UV editing. So I'm going to scroll down and go to the window menu and pick UV editing. And now I have a different view. Okay. On the left is the UV map. Currently there's nothing in it because we have not unwrapped our object yet. On the right is our 3D object with the seams marked in red. So if I just unwrap this object now, let's look at what happens. So I'm going to press A, and then because I'm trying to select everything, and that actually unselected everything, I'm going to press A again, so my whole object is selected, and all faces are selected here. And I'm going to press U, which is the unwrap menu. This menu is window sensitive. So if your mouse isn't here, if it's over here, and you press U, nothing happens. You have to be in the window with your object for the UV mapping menu to appear. And there's lots of things like that in Blender, where if your mouse is not in the right window, your hotkeys and your stuff won't work. So, okay, so we've got several things here. We can do unwrap, smart UV project, light map, follow active quads, cube projection. We're going to talk about all this stuff at a different time. Right now, I'm just going to click unwrap, which is the simplest mode. Okay, so in the left-hand side now, you'll see I have an unwrapped map. The thing is, it looks a little weird. The reason it looks weird is because it's trying to preserve my 3D model in 2 dimensions, except for where I have told it to have a scene. So it has unwrapped the model in such a way that the 3D-ness of it has been smushed down. The consequence of that is this edge and this edge occupy much different spaces in our UV map, which is not really ideal because there's huh?
Oh, sorry. I thought my mic was off. My little sister came in for a second.
Oh, okay. So anyway, this edge here and this edge here, we know that they're the same size in reality, but currently it's unwrapping them in different sizes, which means when we go to paint them, it will be annoying, and we don't want it to be annoying. So let's go back to our window here, and let's switch from we're into our object window here, and let's switch from face mode to edge mode by clicking this button. There's probably a hotkey for it. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect my whole object. And notice that my UV map disappears because it says you don't have anything selected, so I don't know what you want me to show in the UV side. And I'm going to right-click on this diagonal edge. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key and right-click on the next diagonal edge. See that? And then I'm going to do the same thing for all of the nearby diagonal edges. And I'm going to do that going all the way around the box. Hold down the Shift key every time you do this so that they all stay selected. If you accidentally select one incorrectly, just press Control Z to deselect it. Hold on the Shift key and right-click on each edge. There is a much faster way to do this that I'm going to show you in just a second. But this will work too, and I think we have to learn how to do stuff manually before we can learn our shortcuts. I feel. Oop. Okay. 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 Nope, not quite done. You've probably learned by now that you can click on an edge accidentally by clicking something behind what you're trying to click. That's mostly what I've been messing up here. I think this is my last one. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to double check, make sure I have all of my corners selected, and I have every edge selected for every corner, and I do. And I'm going to go to Shading UVs and click Mark Seam again. Okay. And then press A. And it will select my whole box. I'm going to press U and type Unwrap. Okay. That looks a little better. It's still not exactly what we want. And what it's done now is it sets every edge off to its own piece, because we said cut along this seam and then create a UV map for, let me go to my face select mode, this face and this face and this face and this face, because all around that thing now is a seam, so it's all by itself. So that's a little bit better looking. At least all of our edges are roughly the same size now. We can also now start painting it, which is what we're going to do. And there's two different ways you can paint the object within Blender. So I'm going to click on Edit Mode, and instead of going back to Object Mode, I'm going to come up here to what's called Texture Paint. Okay, my block is turned completely white. The reason my block is completely white is because I don't have a paint slot yet to paint into, so it doesn't know what to put on the cube. So you'll see it says missing data, missing materials, add paint slot. So I'm going to click add paint slot, and I'm going to click diffuse color, because all I'm doing really here is painting the color. Then you'll see it will pop up a thing called Material 1 Diffuse Color, and I'm going to change the name of it to Healthbox Texture. And then the width is 1024 by 1024. So your textures typically need to be in powers of 2, and 1024 by 1024 is a good size texture. You know that there are some games that have 4K textures, and that's where they take things and make them hyper realistic by using very large texture files, which we could do, but we don't have any reason for it because this is a really simple object. So we are going to, and then the color is by default is black, and we're going to leave that as black. So I'm going to click OK, and it will apply that black texture to my object, but it hasn't changed it over in my UV editing screen. If I click over here with my left mouse button in my screen, nothing happens because I'm not in UV editing, not actually in UV editing mode. But I come down here to see where it says image. To the right of that, there's a little picture. And you can change which picture you're linked to by clicking on it. And we want to select the one that says Healthbox Texture. And now the image on the left is the texture in 2 dimensions. And the image on the right is that 2-dimensional object applied to my 3-dimensional box. And to prove that, I'm going to grab, my paintbrush here, which is, it's on by default. So now that we have a texture, it's ready to paint. So it switches you to your brush automatically. I didn't have to do anything. And it's giving you a white texture, a white paint by default. And you can switch over to black just by left clicking here. It is only a strength of 70%, which means if you paint over it, it will get more and more intensely white. I'm going to take the strength and move it up to 1 because I don't want to have some of my things kind of painted. So now I'm going to paint the edges of my box white and the center of each face red. And I'm going to do that in the paint box here. Okay. And I'm pretty messy. And I'm just holding the middle mouse button to swing around. And I'm making a huge mess because I don't have really good control in here. And again, there's ways you can improve what we're doing, but again, we're going to do it manually. So learn how to do it wrong so I can teach you. We can take advantage of shortcuts in a minute. Okay. So that's pretty terrible. Let me switch to my red color. I'm just going to take this mouse, the color wheel. I'm just going to drag, left click on the white circle in the middle of it and drag it down to the red area. And I can change how dark the red is by changing the lightness of this slider to the left. So now I'm going to paint the faces red as well as I can. For an object this simple, you normally would not do it this way. because it's not very good. But if you're doing something like painting a character's face, you do want to be able to get in and do very minor, very fine detail work, and doing it in here might make sense. Or if you want to just block out some colors for a simple object that you're building. And my art director has said that she wants this to be a white box with red objects inside, red faces inside. And I missed some faces here, so I'll set this back to white and finish painting these. Okay, so it looks like a child has colored it, which is about right. So the problem is you just don't have really good control of how to tell it to stop when you get to an edge. You can fake it by getting really, really close and painting very carefully. But even then, you're going to make some mistakes. So, sorry, I'm just going to set this back to pure white manually. And I did that by left-clicking on the box here. But this is not a very good way to do this. So a better way to do it is to come over to our UV editing window and change from view, this button down here in this toolbar, in the view toolbar, change from view to paint. And now we can paint in the UV map instead of painting on the object. So we can paint in 2 dimensions, which is going to make things a little bit neater. So I'm going to change the size of my brush from 35 pixels to 125. And if I do that and paint all the edge pieces white and then paint all the boxes red, you get a much nicer looking result. However, because of the way the UV unwrapped our object, they're right next to each other, and it's just hard to get the paint to not bleed over into the other object because the UVs are right next to each other. So we're going to change the UV mapping again. So let's go back to our edit mode by, you can either press tab while you're in the object window, which takes you back to edit mode, or you can come down where it says texture paint and switch to edit mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to change how our UV map is laid out to make our painting easier and make much more sense. So in our UV editing window, change from paint back to view, and you see all of our objects are selected because they're all selected in our object window. And then how you move objects around inside the paint, the UV editing window, depends on what selection you have here. So right now it's selected to vertex. I can also select edge. I can select face, or I can select this fourth option, which we don't have in our 3D view, called island. An island, and we want to select that by left-clicking on it. An island is all of the connected vertices for one face up to the edge of a scene. So an island, if I left-click here, or right-click here to select this object, I can drag it around and see it grabs all of the edges and vertices for me without me having to individually select each face and put them all together. So we want to move this over to the left, and then we want to just right-click on the next one and press the letter G to let you move it around, and just put it right on top of it. Grab the next one, G, put it on top. Doesn't have to match exactly. Right-click, G, put it on top. Right-click, G, put it on top. Right-click, G, put it on top. And again, this is pretty easy because I want these to all have the same, be painted in the same way. So I'm just stacking them up on top of each other so I can just paint it once. And again, it doesn't really matter if they're all lined up. You can do some work to make them line up, which we will do for other things later on, but for this purpose of this, we don't need it. If I right-click on my squares, that's all my interfaces, and I want them to be a different color. So I'm going to press G to move them to a different place inside my UV map. Okay. Now these I want to stack up with my other edges, but they're rotated the wrong way. But that's fine. I'm just going to press R and then type 90 and press enter. Right click, R90, enter. Right click, R90, enter. Right click, R90, enter. And now I press G when I have one selected and stack it up with the other ones. Right click, G, stack. Right click, G, stack. Right click, G, stack. Okay. Now I'm going to press B, and B is the bulk selector, and I'm going to left click here outside of my grid and drag a box around all of my edges. And what this does is it selects all of the vertices at one time, but just for my edges. If I pressed A twice, it would select every vertex, including my the interior faces, which I don't want to select right now. And then I'm going to press S and just drag outwards. I'm going to scale these up because I don't need them to be in a corner by themselves. They're basically the only thing in here with any level of detail. And I'm going to press G to make sure that it is within the bounds of my UV map. And then I'm going to press A to deselect everything. Press B to box select, bulk select, draw a box around my interior faces. Press S to scale it up. And once I've got it to a decent size that I want, press G and move it in here. I'm actually going to scale it down a little bit more so I can be sure I won't overlap. Okay. So, once you've got all this set up, we're going to go to Texture Paint. And see, it pops back to Healthbox Texture because it knows that's what you want to use. But also notice everything we painted a minute ago is gone. Once you switch out of texture mode, before you switch out of texture paint mode, save your work or it will dump it, which it just did. Which is fine because it was what we have was pretty terrible. So I've got my red color selected here, so I'm going to click this from View to Paint, and then I'm just going to roughly paint over the interior edges. I'm going to set this back to white by manually left-clicking on the color box and manually setting all three values to 1. And then I'm going to paint all my edges.
I like how you can see it being like painted on the model at the same time.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So now we have very crisp edges. Our outside edges are white, which is what our art director wants, and our inside edges are red. And we've got a good, clean UV map where everything has the same texture is stacked on top of each other, so we don't have to duplicate effort. And now we need to indicate to the player that it's a health object. Okay. We're going to use a simple white cross here. Now, I want to talk for a second about the Red Cross. The International Red Cross and the International Red Crescent very actively protect the image of the Red Cross on a white background, or the Red Crescent on a white background. The reason they do this for things as silly as video games is that they do not want that image to be used in any context except for this is a place you can get help. Some video games flirt right up to the line with that image, and some video games frankly get away with it. But they're pretty active in protecting it, and I respect that, so we're not going to mess with the International Red Cross. So we're going to use the flag of Switzerland instead, because who cares about Switzerland? No, just kidding. I need to make a cross inside of my thing here, and if I make one in the middle of my red square here, it'll put it on every face, which is what I want. So I make sure that I have a white texture selected. I'm going to turn the radius down to 45 or so, and I'm just going to draw a simple white plus mark here. Okay. Or you can use the letter H, which a number of games do, or anything else that strikes your fancy. Just something to communicate to the player that they can get health here. You could make it into a heart. And you have a companion cube. The problem here is that my plus is not very well done, and I don't have any edges to restrict it to because it's just art in the middle of the box. And this is where we're going to switch over to using GIMP. But before we do that, we want to save this image. So you see the image has a little asterisk next to it. That is your indicator. Hey, I haven't saved anything. So I'm going to click on image, left click here, and click save as image. And I'm going to go to my game dev folder. And we'll click Zombie Quarantine Session 10, Assets, My Materials, or My Textures, and you see it says Healthbox Texture.png, so I already know what it is. Click Save as Image, and now that image has been saved, and I can open it in GIMP and mess around with it. Okay, so, but before we do that, we also need to export the actual UV image so that we don't go outside of the bounds of our UV mapping. So I'll show you what I mean here, but let's go to Image and do... I'm going to have to remember how to do this. Oh, let's go to Edit Mode. We've saved the image. Oh, one more thing. No, I'm not going to talk about that. Let's go to Edit Mode. There we go. And go to Image... Oh, I'm in Paint mode. View. Okay. Press A to make sure everything is selected. And then you see where it says UVs. That's what I was looking for. Couldn't find. You're going to do Export UV Layout. Making sure all of your UVs are selected. If you don't, it'll only export the ones that you have selected. Export UV Layout. And again, we're going to go to our game dev folder. Go Zombie Quarantine Session 10, which is the one I'm working on right now. Assets. And my textures. And I'm going to call it Healthbox UV.png. And we're going to click Export UV Layout. So what that does is it creates an image file so that you can see where the edges of your actual thing are, of your actual object are. Okay, so we're done with UV editing. So we're going to change back to our default view. And our object is pretty much ready to go. We're going to clean up the texture using GIMP. And we have touched on basically nothing in Blender at all. We have just nothing. As we move through the game, we're going to develop more complicated objects that we need to build. And we'll build them in Blender together. And we will do that going forward as we decide we need things that we don't already have objects for. But we're pretty much done with this. So I want to save it. So I'm going to click File, Save As, and D, Game Dev, Session 10, Assets, My Models, Healthbox.blend. Save as Blender file. Now, as it happens, Blender files by default will work in Unity. You don't have to do anything at all to them. But I still always use FBXs, which is called Filmbox, another file format. And I don't have a good reason for it. I just do because I know that Filmbox will always work. So I'm going to do File, Export, and you'll see you have an option here for FBX. If you don't see the option for FBX, let me know, because I can't remember if I manually installed it or if it comes baked in. Okay, so I'm going to click FBX. Okay. So, you'll see that, Geese?
Hey, Jim.
Hey.
FBX was there for me.
Okay, great. Since I sent you all the same download link, you should all have it. Okay, so you see that it defaults to call itself healthbox.fbx because you notice you just exported it as healthbox.blend, and it's in the My Models folder already because that's where you just exported the Blender file. But there's some settings that you want to set. The scale should be 1. Apply scaling should be all local. Forward should be -Z forward, and up should be Y up. Again, I've been working with this version of Blender for a while, and I have made some settings. I can't remember if these are default or not, but this will make the object oriented correctly in Blender or in Unity. Again, it's not really a huge deal because it's a box, so we can, if it's upside down, we won't even notice. But if you have a more complicated object like a cannon or a street light or a mailbox or something, the orientation will matter to you. Usually, you can flip it over in Unity and it's fine. But anyway, so we'll make sure all that is checked. We don't have any armatures, geometries, apply modifiers and use modifiers, render settings. We haven't talked about any modifiers. There's no modifiers in the model that we've built, although later we can add some. Armatures are used for rigging animated models, and animations are exported because you can do animations in this tool, which we are going to do when we need some other animations that we don't currently have. So anyway, make sure that this is all local, -Z forward, Y up, and click export, and make sure this path here is set to your My Models folder. And we're going to export the FBX. And now we're done using Blender. Notice that because I exported it again, Blender has a little asterisk next to it. And what that says is, hey, you changed something. What I changed was I exported it as a Filmbox model. It doesn't really matter. But I can click File, Save, and it will save the Blender file, the .blend file, and I can be sure that there's not some change that I missed in between those two steps. Okay, so we are now done with Blender right now, except for I want to show you one quick trick. So let's press 1 to go back into our front view, and press Z to make our, so we can see through the box, okay? And then switch from face mode to vertex mode by clicking on this box in this toolbar. And I believe you can do it by, let's do, sorry. Is it Control F? No, I can't remember how to do it. There's a shortcut for switching back and forth between face and vertex, and I always use this toolbar, so anyway. I'm going to press A to deselect everything. I'm going to press 1, and I'm going to press B to box select my corners. So you can still use the box select in this mode, which would have been a faster way for me to pick up all the vertices in a corner. I could have just gone A, B, give me all of these, and see I can get them all in one go, and I can click Mark Seam, and it would have created a seam there. You don't want to do 2 corners at once, though. Let me try this trick here. I'm box select again, because it also picks up the edges in between, because you have this vertex here, and this vertex here, both selected. So when you do that, it says, oh, you must want this edge as well. And if you click Mark Seam here, it wouldn't just mark the corner, it would also make seams along that edge, which would break each of the edge values, each of the edge faces into its own separate island in our UV map, which is not what we want. I'm not going to save this because I've undone something that I want to do, but I am going to close out of this. And it says, hey, you changed something. And I really do want to quit because I've already saved everything that I need. When I switch back to Unity, it has to first assign an identifier to the Healthbox so that it knows how to refer to it in the game. But we can check in My Models and see that the Healthbox is there. And scroll over here. You can see that that's the FBX. And we've also got the Healthbox.blend, which again will work perfectly fine, but I choose not to use it. Also notice that it's got our texture applied to it. We didn't have to do that manually. It says, oh, you imported a Filmbox object. You must want this material that I got from Blender, and so I'll go ahead and put that on your box for you, which is nice. We're going to mess with that material in a second because we're going to go to GIMP and edit it a little bit, a tiny amount. And then we go to My Textures, and we can see that we've got the Healthbox texture and the Healthbox UV. So that's what the UV text box, the UV mapping looks like. Now, I've got GIMP set up so that when I double click to open these, it will open them up in GIMP. But let's just go to GIMP and we'll navigate manually. So I'm going to do File, Open. I'm going to go Game Dev, Session 10, Assets, My Textures, and I want to open up Healthbox texture. Hold down Shift, select them both, and click Open. And we will open 2 files. One is our UV map. And notice that there's these white and gray checks behind it. That indicates that it's transparent. And the only reason we want this image is just so we make sure we don't go up, that we more or less have our texture centered. And then we also have our painted texture, which, again, looks like a child drew it. But the extra paint outside of the boundaries of the edges is just discarded. It's not projected anywhere, and that allows us to make our edges look nice and crisp. That's the reason I painted outside the box. So I'm going to go to my UV, Healthbox UV image. I'm going to hit Control A, which will give me the little ants marching image around the edge of the image. I'm going to hit Control C to copy it. Click back over into my Healthbox texture and hit Control V. And then I'm going to hit Control Shift N. That says take the thing I just pasted and put it in a whole new layer. So GIMP works using layers. So there's a layer tab here in the right hand side. And if I go to my UV, you see I only have one layer, which is the Healthbox UV.png, the image I exported. But if I go back to my Healthbox texture, it has two layers. It has the pasted layer, and I can click here and rename it UV mapping. So I can remember that it's the UV mapping layer. And I've also got a couple of options here in GIMP. I can turn the layer off so I can't see it, which we will want to do in some cases. And I can also, when I have this layer selected, you can select by left clicking. When I have the UV mapping layer selected, I can actually change the opacity to make it less opaque, so I can see through it better if it's blocking my image. Okay, so the thing we wanted to do was we wanted to make the plus symbol in the middle crisper to the extent that we can. So I'm going to turn off the UV mapping right now, and I'm going to press, while I'm inside, I'm going to make sure I have the Healthbox texture.png layer selected. While I'm inside the red, or inside the image, I'm going to press O. And you'll see that your tool changes from a finger to, or whatever you had selected, to an eyedropper. And what that does is it says, wherever you click, I'm going to pick up that color. And I'm going to press left click inside the red, and notice that my color box here for my brush changes from whatever the default was, which is probably black, to the red color. That way I don't have to try and guess what shade of red I used. Like, it was all red with 25 blue, because I was using a color wheel in Blender. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint over the existing white cross because I don't like it at all. So I'm going to click my paintbrush, or I can just hit P, and it'll switch over to a brush. I can change the size of the brush, and I can just paint over the cross entirely. Okay, turn on my mapping. Now what I want to do is I want to try and line up my cross so that it is exactly, or as close as I can get to exactly, in the center of my UV map. And I can eyeball it, but I can also use a grid. So I can go to Layer, go to Image, and do Configure Grid. And right now it's set to have a grid that is 10 pixels by 10 pixels, which is not very much at all. So I'm going to set it to 50 by 50 and click OK. But there's no grid on the screen because I have to go to View, Show Grid. Okay. So now I've got a grid I can work with. So sort of like having graph paper to help you cheat around to make things straight. My UV image isn't exactly centered, but it's pretty close to matching up to the corners. I can keep playing with the scale of the grid to make it exactly match. But this will help me figure out where the center is. The center is more or less here. But I don't want to paint a circle because I'll end up with the same sort of cruddy looking cross I had a minute ago. I want to paint with a square paintbrush. So I'm going to come to my brush, and the third brush in is a square flat brush block. It is currently kind of small, so I'm going to take the scale of it and set it to 100. Just left click to mouse over that, or you can drag it. That looks about the size that I want. This looks like it's about centered to me. That's about centered, I think. And I'm going to left click one time. Whoop, but I'm painting in red is the problem. So I'm going to take my color bar here, and I want to paint in white, so I'm just going to click the switch arrow that says take my background color and make it my foreground color, and that means that puts white in the front. If you don't have white as your background color, you can left click on the object and just drag in the color picker up to the upper left hand corner, and that is pure white. Okay, now I'm going to come here where I think it's mostly centered. Mostly. I'm looking at the boxes on each side to try and see if I have the right sort of number of boxes. And it looks pretty good. And I'll left click once. Okay. Then I'm going to come down to where I want it to be, except for that I don't want to get off center. I want to keep going in a completely straight line. So I'm going to hold down the shift key. And I'm going to hold down the control key. And control means I can only, control, shift. Yeah. If you hold on the control key, it forces you to go only by certain angles. So it's not anywhere you move it. So if I just drag down, it will keep it more or less straight for me. And then I'm going to left click one time. And now I've got a vertical bar. Neat. Now, I can do that exercise again by rotating my brush 90 degrees, or I can copy the thing I just pasted and then turn it 90 degrees. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to View, Show Grid, turn that off because we don't need the grid anymore. I'm going to turn off my UV mapping for right now. And then I'm going to select the Fuzzy Select tool, which grabs a selection based on the color. And I'm going to left click that here. And you'll see it picks up my box. It doesn't go all the way to the edges because the pixels start to be less white, and it's got a certain threshold. My threshold is set to 9, which is very low because I want to just get the white bits. But that's fine. That'll work to the level of detail that we're going to be seeing this object. This selection will work fine. So I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, Control Shift N, which will make a new layer that just has this white bar on it. And then I'm going to go to there's a transform up here called Rotate tool, which is also you can do with Shift R. Left click on the object and you can just rotate it manually. But I know I want it to be exactly 90 degrees. And then click Rotate. Okay. Then I'm going to do Layer, New from Visible. And that means it's going to take all the layers that it can see and make a whole new layer just from the visible layers. I use New from Visible all the time. And then we're going to turn on our UV mapping one more time to check to see that our cross is more or less in the center of it. And it is. Okay. So we had opened Healthbox texture, and if we export it again, or save it again, it will overwrite Healthbox texture, which is what we want to do. So we're going to do File, Export, Overwrite Healthbox texture.png. So when you save files in GIMP, they save them as XCF files, so files that GIMP can read. If you want to export as a specific image type, you have to go to Export. So let's say if I want to make a JPEG, I can go to Export as and change this from PNG to JPG. I don't. I want to leave it as Healthbox texture.png, and I do want to overwrite it. So I'm just going to go File, Overwrite Healthbox texture.png. I don't need to change anything with the UV mapping. I only had it as reference, and I want to make sure that my discard changes. I want to make sure that my UV mapping layer is off when I export it, because otherwise the UV mapping will become part of the image, and you actually see it presented on the box. Okay, so again, this is like 1% of what you can do in GIMP. This is nothing. We're going to get much more into it as we move along. But let's leave GIMP open for a second because I want to show you one other thing in just a minute. So leave GIMP open for now, and let's navigate back to Unity. Unity will have our new box, and we see the white cross is here correctly. In fact, if we go to my models and go to Healthbox, you'll see that it automatically updates with the correct image. So that's what my art director wanted the Healthbox to look like, and the art director is me, so I'm very easy to please. And I'm going to put it into the scene, And then we need to let the player pick it up, which means we're going to have to write some code. So I'm going to drag the box, and I'm going to put it into the scene. Notice that the radius of the cube that we built was 1 meter. So when you drop it into the scene, it goes to its origin, which is in the middle, and sets that at the layer of the surface. Also, it's gigantic. It is the size of our player, because there's a radius of 1 meter, which means it is a total of 2 meters high, just like our player is, right? So we want to scale it down, and it's a little bit bigger than that because we extruded faces outward. So we want to scale it down a little bit. So I'm going to come to Healthbox, and you see where it says scale? Okay. So why does it say scale 100? Because Blender and Unity don't always play well together, and I have a setting wrong somewhere. So instead of exporting it at a size of 1:1, it exported it at a size of 100. That can be problematic, but for this, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to change the scale of the object that I brought in. I'm trying to think real quick if there's a quick way to fix that. Healthbox, model, scale factor, 0.01. Apply, and then drag my Healthbox out here, and that's not right. Don't do that. If you did that, go back to model and change this scale factor back to 1. There is a way to make it be export as 1 meter and come in as 1 meter, but let's apply. Okay, it doesn't matter because it's just a health box. We'll mess around with it more as we start doing more with Blender and Unity. Okay. 1 centimeter in the file to width. That should be right, but it's not. It's converting to... Anyway, doesn't matter. Healthbox, we're going to scale this down to 25, and 25, and 25. Okay, I'm going to put it over here to the right of my player, and I'm going to press play. We haven't actually pressed play in the game this whole time yet. And I'm going to walk over to the box and pick it up. Except for nothing happens because, well, there's no script attached to this box, and there's nothing telling the player or the game what to do with it when the player runs into it. It also doesn't have any kind of collider on it, so the player is able to just run right through it. So we want to create a script, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to add a collider to this box. So we're going to add component, sphere collider. I'm using a sphere collider instead of a box collider because I want the range of picking up the box to be a little bit bigger than the box itself. Double click on Healthbox to zoom in. I'm going to take the radius here and make it, well, I can just drag it. Edit collider. That's not what I want to do. Yeah, let's drag the radius up. Just left click on the word radius and drag to the right very slowly. And yeah, 0.03 should work. So now when the player gets close to the health box, it will run into the sphere collider. So let's do that. So, and notice I can't now run into the health box because there's a solid collider there. That's not what I want either. I want the player to be able to run over this thing and pick it up. So to do that, I'm going to check the is trigger box on the sphere collider. Now, in order for this to work, what I'm asking it to do is I'm asking it to trigger a physics collision when something runs into this collider. In order to do that, I'm going to click Add Component, Rigid Body. It has to have a physics. The game has to know that it's physics oriented in order for the trigger to work. So I'm going to press play. And now we have a different problem, which is that the box falls through the terrain. The reason it falls through the terrain is because when I added the rigid body, I left it with use gravity on. The reason it's falling through the terrain is because the sphere collider is not telling it to stop because it says it's a trigger. So the gravity is being applied, but it's not bouncing off the surface. If I change this from is trigger and press play, you'll see that it will drop to the ground and start rolling around. Well, not rolling around. It's just, let me minimize. I'm already on the ground. Is that the problem? Yeah. Okay, you see it drops a little bit and stops. Which is also not what we want. So we're going to uncheck use gravity. And we're going to add one more component, auto rotate. This is the script that you got at the very beginning of the game. And we're going to make this rotate 20 and 20 and 20. And we have use gravity off and is kinematic checked. Is kinematic says there's another script that's going to handle how this thing moves. You don't need to worry. The physics engine does not need to worry about it. So press play. And now my box is spinning in a pleasing way. I'm still getting eaten by my zombies. But I have its trigger turned off, so I can't interact with it. Turn its trigger back on. And now when I run into it, I will trigger the collision. But there's still no script applied to this thing. So we need to add a script called Healthbox Pickup. Later on, we're going to create a generic pickup script that we can use for any object. But right now, we want the Healthbox Pickup to handle its own business. So we're going to double click on Healthbox Pickup, and you'll see it's got a bunch of things. We don't need to use the start or update functions because the auto rotation script is handling the thing moving around in space. What we do need to do is use on trigger enter. So we're going to create public void on trigger enter. This is a function built into Unity. Collider other. And see, it might automatically complete it, but if it doesn't, add collider and then the word other. So this is a collider. Is the other thing that ran into me. I don't like the word other, so I'm going to change it to my colliding object. Okay, so this says if something runs into the box, we want to do a couple of things. The first thing we do is see if it was the player. If the zombies run into the health box, we don't want anything to happen at all. So we're going to do, in fact, we're going to make the zombies run around the health box in just a second by making it, having it impact the nav mesh. Okay, so on trigger enter, we're going to say if my colliding object dot game object dot compare tag is the quote player, then we're going to say my colliding object dot game object dot get component health. In other words, get the health object from that's associated with the object that ran into me, and dot take damage negative 10, 20, whatever. 0.0f and that. So now we've put a magic number in here. Oh, sorry, it is an integer. I'm sorry. So take damage, remember in our health script, I have it open here for a reason. Take damage says subtract this amount of damage. If I make the take damage value negative, it will add health back to us. So, in fact, let's make it, okay, let's leave all that. Let's save that. So it's going to add 20 health back to our player. So, go to my player. Let's change our maximum health from 200 to 40. And my current health from 200 to 40. And let's make our zombies do, these are our zombies. I'm going to have their damage be 4. No, 2. Okay. So let's see what happens if this works. Let's make sure that our player is tagged with the player, and it is not. So we're going to change the tag from untagged to player, and we're going to press play. I'm gonna let the zombies come and get me and eat on me a little bit, then I'm gonna run over and pick up some health, or try. Okay, and I can see I'm taking damage. I'm gonna go over here and pick up health. Now, I did pick up health. You see my health bar in the upper left-hand corner is now white. But they're doing damage to me and nothing's happening. The reason that nothing's happening is because my health is 50 currently, and my maximum health is 40. Because we healed way more than the damage we had taken. So the damage hasn't started showing up because we're still actually overhealed. I'll uncheck this, let them attack me for a few more seconds. And now we're down below 40, we start taking damage again. So that's not great. So faking it out by doing the opposite of take damage won't quite work for us. We're going to have to create a custom function specifically for healing the player in the health script. So open up health.cs, and let's create a new function under take damage called public void heal damage. Int my healed damage. Okay. And in order to heal the damage, we need to do a check first. If my current health plus my healed damage is greater than or equal to my max health, then my current health is equal to my max health. So what it says is if I'm going to be overhealed, just heal me up to whatever my maximum is. Otherwise, my current health, and we're going to use plus equals, saying just add my healed damage. So my current health is equal to my current health plus my healed damage, is what that shortcut says. Okay? So, we need to try out both those scenarios. For the first one, we're going to let the zombie eat us a lot and cause a lot of damage. And we're going to see it partially heal up, and then we're going to run into it again and cause it to heal up a second time. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go back to my Healthbox pickup. And instead of doing take damage, minus 20, I'm going to do heal damage, positive 20. And I should have that function available to me if I've saved health script. Save everything, pop back to Unity. Okay, so we're going to let the zombies chew on us for a minute. And remember that we don't have any death conditions, so I can actually let them chew on me all the way until I'm dead. And I know that my health is 40, so if I'm down past half, then it won't heal me for more than that. So run over here and pick up his health. And it healed me for a lot more than 20. It healed me all the way back up. My health, here you see it's set back to 40. The reason for that is I have interacted with it multiple times. I only want to interact with it one time. So go back to my Healthbox pickup, and on trigger enter, if the colliding object is the player, then I'm going to do game object dot set active false. So it will heal my damage and will also disable this object. Click save. Back here. Press play. Get chewed on a little bit. Okay. And now it heals me for 20, but I still have some damage taken because they had eaten my face. Also, the health box is gone, so I can't heal up more. But I can let them bite me once, and we can test to make sure that our max health rule is working as expected. If I run over here and pick this up, it disappears, and my health is back to maximum. And I can just double check my health has been set to my current health, even though it massively overhealed me. Okay, So that is that for that functionality. We're going to want to do things like add in a sound for it to pick up. We're going to want to change other kinds of pickups, like different weapons and armor. But that's the basic function of how you pick something up in a game. And that took much less time than actually building the box in Blender and painting it in GIMP. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there. And I will stop recording and see if you guys have any questions. And